It's a theological world. After all, after all, after all, after all.
All right, welcome to It's a Theological World After All. Today we are exploring a series of exciting topics that hinge upon the question of theology's relevance for today in our popular Western culture. Why does theology still matter today to our academic as well as broader popular discussion? So we have the distinguished philosopher and professor at Oxford, Stephen Priest, with us, who is who you're familiar with, and you've met him before, of course, on a previous show. He is a metaphysician, properly speaking, but he's done a lot of work in the areas of existentialism and thinking about existentialism, continental thought, and how it overlaps with the analytic philosophical tradition. So today we're going to be exploring a variety of those issues and how they relate. And what can the existentialists really teach us about consciousness, about the ultimate meaning, about the meaning of life, and about theology's relevance today. So thanks for joining us, Stephen, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me, Joshua.
Yes, good to have you with us. I was just talking about how we were having some technical difficulties once again. That never happens, does it? You never experience that, do you?
No, I'm a complete master of technology. I've never been in the least bit stressed out by it. It's all gone seamlessly for decades.
Yes, right. We are machines, after all, are we not? Or
not essentially, I think. Not essentially.
Very good.
My R might be wrong. You might be a presence through some sort of fleshy machine.
That's right.
But I think you're essentially a presence. You are this presence.
Yeah. So, that's interesting. Okay, do you think that? So when I think about the AI world, I think about chatbots and the like. I read a great book recently by a Paris philosopher who was arguing that effectively he was taking up Leibniz's argument and saying effectively that, well, chatbot artificial intelligence are effectively just the most sophisticated and complicated kind of representations of the mind that we have yet to date. And so just following Leibniz, he says, well, this at one level, this is a good thing, but we've always been doing this as human beings. We've been creating all sorts of things to kind of offload the menial tasks of life, the sort of boring, mundane tasks, so that we can get to the real good stuff, like meditation and contemplation or doing metaphysics, which Leibniz sees as a good thing, right? So this philosopher of Paris, and I forgot his name at the moment, he's just published this book. Let's see, the internet, what you thought you knew about the internet, something to that effect. And so he's giving a history of the philosophy of the internet, and he touches on the theme of AI. So yeah, with that, if chatbots are kind of representations of the mind, do you think that we have good reason to experience presence, as it were, that is more so than kind of this representation? So
yes, I think that artificial intelligence, AI systems don't have the kind of presence that you are. I think in some clear sense, AI systems are intelligence systems, but the intelligence is artificial. I think we need to draw a distinction between three things: being conscious, being alive, and being intelligent. And these are quite different things: being alive, being conscious, and being intelligent. And the three things are sometimes conflated in debates about AI. Now, I think there's a clear sense in which artificial intelligence is intelligence, and that is that it's possible to solve problems computationally of great complexity, and they at great speed and with great accuracy in a way that exceeds the capabilities of human beings. And Turing's right that if in the human case you would say this is intelligence at work, then you shouldn't withhold the predicate is intelligent from the AI case. But that doesn't tell us anything about whether the system is conscious or whether the system is alive. So it's quite interesting that in the 20th, 21st century, these three things, being conscious, being alive, and being intelligent, are coming apart. Whereas in some respects they've been conflated over history. I mean, not always and everywhere. I mean, blades of grass are alive, but they're not intelligent or conscious unless you think there's a sort of teleological biological intelligence without consciousness, or unless you think there's some kind of animism is true. Prima facie, these are three distinct things. But I mean, we're here to talk about existentialism, aren't we? And I think
yes.
I think that some of the questions raised in existentialism bear on AI, even though existentialists didn't, the people we historically understand as existentialists predate AI essentially or largely. We can use their ideas to talk about AI a bit.
Yeah.
I think that existentialism, that movement in 19th and 20th century European thought in literature as well as in philosophy, that movement is really held together by a group of questions or a group of problems or a group of issues rather than by doctrines or dogmas or theses. And these questions are roughly, how should I live my life? How should I exercise my freedom of choice? How should I face death? For example, is death really something to be feared? What are my responsibilities to my fellow human beings and to myself? On what sort of grounds should I make political or religious or sexual commitments? Is something being right or wrong just a matter of opinion, or is there some sort of yardstick or criterion or something we can have recourse to decide what's right and what's wrong? So there are lots of quite fundamental questions which are about the human situation or the human condition, which are raised by existentialism. I mean, we can talk about people, but and we will need to draw on their ideas about these questions. But in philosophy, the questions or the problems are far more important than issues about who said what when.
Yeah,
I mean, famous existentialists include the Danish Lutheran theologian Søren Kierkegaard, who lived in the first half of the 19th century. They include the rather iconoclastic German atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who lived in the second half of the 19th century. They include Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher who lived in the first nearly 80 years of the 20th century. His friend Simone de Beauvoir, who's both an existentialist and a feminist. In a way, also his friend Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who's both a phenomenologist and an existentialist. They have something called existential phenomenology. It's all written in this terminology, but you kind of get used to that. We could talk a bit about what phenomenology is as well. In a way, Albert Camus is an existentialist, even though he's really an absurdist novelist and playwright and short story writer. He's another atheist. And of course, Martin Heidegger, the famous 20th century German philosopher, counts as an existentialist, at least as far as I'm concerned. I mean, something that existentialists have in common is that they tend to deny that they are existentialists. I mean, to be rather cynical about it, it's verging on a necessary condition for being an existentialist that you disavow or refuse this label, existentialist. I mean, Heidegger says that he's not an existentialist, but Jean-Paul, well, the reason why Heidegger did that is that at the end of the Second World War, just after it had finished, in October 1945, Sartre delivered a lecture in Paris in the Club Maintenant, the Now Club in Paris, and the talk was about existentialism, roughly, what is existentialism? He called it l'existentialisme et l'humanisme. Existentialism is a kind of humanism, all right? And in this talk, he seems to ascribe existentialism to Heidegger. Well, Heidegger became acquainted with the transcript of the talk, which we can read now in the US or the UK. It's published. Yeah, Heidegger was clearly annoyed at being categorized as an existentialist, as though, there's some sort of fluffy French literary thing, and he's a serious philosophical thinker.
Metaphysician, right? Yeah.
Well, he technically he wants to reject metaphysics. I mean, I agree with you. I think he is a metaphysician. I think Heidegger is doing metaphysics, or he's trying to do metaphysics, but he doesn't want the label for various Kantian reasons. He thinks that Kant has discredited metaphysics. But anyway, Heidegger wrote a reply called The Question of Humanism, which came out a few years after Sartre's talk. And Heidegger says, oh, no, I'm not an existentialist. Roughly, he says, I'm a fundamental ontologist. I'm interested in the question of being, what it consists in to exist or to be. And that's not to do with these human problems. And then that I would say that seemed to be all right. But then Derrida, Jacques Derrida, the post-structuralist thinker and arguably an initiator, in 1968 or 69, I can't remember, brought out a paper called The Ends of Man, Les Fins de l'Homme. I think it's in Margins of Philosophy, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Derrida says, in effect, that Sartre has a much better understanding of Heidegger and what Heidegger's doing than Heidegger has.
Really?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of Derrida's provocative, but in a way reasoned style, that you might have a better understanding of an author and their work than the author does themselves. So on these grounds, Derrida says, Heidegger is an existentialist. And Heidegger has misunderstood himself and misunderstood his work. And Sartre has a much better understanding of Heidegger than Heidegger does. That's the import of the paper. Now, in this, interesting, I mean, I agree with Derrida on this, because if you look at the central work, the 1927 book, Being and Time, Sein und Zeit, Heidegger begins by raising the question of being. What is it to be? This is as a global question, not as a question about what is it to be a human being or for human beings to exist. What is it for there to be being rather than nothing whatsoever? Okay. But Heidegger says, as a preliminary to this inquiry, we need to inquire into the inquirer. We need to understand the being of the being that raises the question of being in order to approach the question of being. Now, whether he's wrong or whether he's right about that, for the next few hundred pages of the book, he is talking essentially about the kind of being exhibited by human beings, by being human. So the existential structures of what he calls Dasein, the kind of being there, as he puts it, Dasein of the human, take up more or less the whole book. And the book's unfinished, and he never gets around to addressing directly the question, what is it to be? Or what is it to be rather than not to be? Or what is it to exist? Or what is being? He doesn't address it directly in the way that, say, Parmenides does, the Greek pre-Socratic philosopher. Parmenides So this is all about the people, I suppose.
No, that's good. That's a good kind of preface to the
Yeah,
whole discussion. Let
yeah.
me let you you've said a lot about there's a lot there about existentialism. Let me step back and even if you've already said this, let's say it again in a different let's see if we can say it a different way and unpack because you've said a lot and there's a lot that's rich there in terms of what is existentialism, kind of, and why is it still alive today? Is it still alive today? You know, when I think of the existentialist, I often think, for much of my educational history, I've approached the existentialist with some um, skepticism. I think that was due in large part to kind of the professors I had and how their perspective on the existentialist. But I always found the existentialist more interesting to read than much of the denser kind of metaphysical or theological works that are on offer, or the works of medieval metaphysics and things of that sort. I always found it more interesting to read Camus, who you said, I thought he was an existentialist myself, and um, uh, and so, let's step back and think about like this whole question of being through the lens of existentialism. What is existentialism, and how does it? Why is it still alive today in our culture? Because it sounds like from this discussion that you're having, it sounds like you still believe it's really alive and well in some ways, and it's still really relevant to our questions of being and ultimate being, metaphysics. For you,
Yeah.
this has been an important area of study. Existentialism leads you back to metaphysics, ironically, right?
That's definitely right. I think in order to see why existentialism leads to metaphysics, we have to understand the questions raised in existentialism better. We have to have a clearer understanding of the questions. And I think it's because these questions are in a way perennial human questions that existentialism is still relevant or still important. In philosophy, as in many things, there are fashions. And so, whether the existentialists are on the philosophy syllabus in a university might come and go over the decades, but the questions they raise are perhaps raised by any thoughtful human being. Having said that, I think understanding the questions at a profound level might require a measure of reflection and deconditioning. You and I are both interested in the extent to which we're conditioned or caused to believe in the way in which we believe without reflecting deeply. I mean, I'll give you one example of a question. I think there's a profound question about why somebody is yourself, why somebody is you. Now, as with many, many philosophical questions, it's a bit difficult to understand the profundity of the question because we think we know how to approach the question. For example, if I say, well, we don't know why you are you, you might say, well, Stephen, don't your parents had sexual intercourse and that they were those particular parents, and you've got this genetic makeup, and you were born in this town or village in Oxfordshire and in England, and you were educated in this way, and you had those friends and influences. You were in these neurological states. Okay, now I know all that. This is fair enough, but I think all those observations, or if you like, truths or facts, go to answering a different question. They explain why this human being is the way it is. They explain why this human being is the way it, or largely they go
Mhm.
towards explaining why this human being is the way it is. But I think there's still a mystery about you being you, which is why do you view the world from the human being you are? Or why are you centered on this human being? Or why is this human being the human being who you are?
Yeah.
Now, this shows up in Sartre and in Merleau-Ponty. I'll show you some books that I put together or wrote. This is not for
Right.
commercial purposes. There's, as you can imagine, not there's no Harry Potter money to be made in these. I
Yes,
get
I'm aware. Yes.
50p per volume sold.
Yeah.
This is a book about Merleau-Ponty, and this is an anthology of Jean-Paul Sartre's writings called Basic Writings. Well, Merleau-Ponty, in his 1945 book, The Phenomenology of Perception, has a chapter called The Body, Le Corps, and Sartre, in the book he brought out 2 years earlier in 1943, Being and Nothingness, he has a chapter also called Le Corps, called The Body, and both Sartre and Merleau-Ponty describe the physical asymmetries between being a human being, the human being who you are, and observing any of those human beings who you're not. Anyone who you are not is, so to speak, over there as some being that can be picked out or toured or walked around or referred to in a third person way. But as far as you're concerned, in the case of one and only one human being, there's such a thing as to look out of it or be centered on it or go where it goes. For example, you've never seen the back of your own head, and you've never seen your own face. Now you might say, "Oh, yes, but I could use a mirror or two mirrors to do that." That's true, but that's we're not doing epistemology here. It's not a problem about knowledge. It's a problem about being. Okay. The question is, why is there such a thing as you being this human being, or indeed you being anything? Now, I think that this very human being could have existed. You watching this video now, this very human being could have existed without it being you, right?
Yeah.
Rather an odd thought, but odd thoughts are necessary for doing philosophy, in particular for understanding philosophical questions. That there could have been this very human being who you take yourself to be, or this human being who perhaps you are, wearing just these clothes, watching just this video, but you don't see anything at all. That human being does. The human being you normally take yourself to be could have been just another member of the public. Could have been just another member of the public. They might have to have been somebody else. All right.
Yes.
Somebody else
Yes.
might have had to view the world, so to speak, from your human being. But if you imagine all the human beings there are, all the ones in the US, the UK, China, Russia, wherever else, all these human beings all over the planet, one of them is extremely odd and peculiar because you're centered on it, or you look out from it, or you go where it goes. Now, in philosophy, or indeed in science, we've got next to no idea of how to understand this you are it, this being it, as opposed to there just being members of the public wandering around on the planet. It's as though one of the human beings is inside out, or perhaps outside in, and your existence consists in, so far as we can tell, in earthly existence, it consists in being this human being, or viewing the world from this human being, or as I was suggesting right at the beginning of this talk, this interview, being a presence. You're perhaps present at this human being, or you're present through this human being. But what I mean by that is not that your body is present, even though that's true. I mean, you are a pure presence. You are a presence. Yeah. So now you see that's a problem or a question, because we've got no idea why any of this should be the case. In Sartre's 1938 novel, Nausea, La Nausée, I said it was existentialism in literature as well as in straight philosophy. The central character, Antoine Roquentin, becomes aware of his own existence, and he finds it very disturbing. He doesn't really like the fleshiness of his hands, and it seems an arbitrary or contingent or accidental matter that he is anything at all. In particular, one of these fleshy beings, and he doesn't like it. He finds it very, very disconcerting. And on the bus, he's making a bit of a fuss about it, at least inwardly. Um, yeah. So there could have been all the human beings that there are, including the one you take yourself to be, but it might have been that nothing was you. It might have been that none of these human beings was you. So I think it's an extra fact about a human being that you are it. And this is although there are physical and psychological symptoms, this is not a physical fact and it's not a mental fact. Now, AI is light years away from having this kind of self or being someone that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Now that's a profound existentialist question. I mean, I've for 45 years or more actually before. I mean, I used to read existentialist literature before I ever studied philosophy at university. I used to read it at school or at the same time when I was at school. I think Albert Camus' novel La Peste was the set book for my French school exams and so on. But I think this sort of question, you haven't got any hope of answering without recourse to religion, without recourse to theology, unless you start to take seriously the possibility that you are a soul, and unless you take seriously the idea that God has bestowed upon you or bestowed upon this human being the property of being you, then you're not going to come near any sort of answer to this existentialist question. Why is something you? So this is just one example of something that I've noticed over the last 45 years of teaching philosophy, which is the failure of secular answers to philosophical questions. You're gonna have to start taking spirituality seriously, especially the existence of God and the immortality of the soul, to answer these questions, including why are you? And then you see, I mean,
go ahead.
Your mind could have been somebody else's, and your body could have been somebody else's. I mean, I think you and I could swap bodies and minds. That's all right, okay. Or it's a contingent fact, a fact that could have been otherwise about you, that you think these thoughts and you've got this body, but there's something about you which is essentially you, or unchangingly you, or essentially you, not accidentally or contingently you. And it's this that I'm calling the soul. It's whatever it is that has your thoughts and experiences. It's the hidden witness to the world. It's that which you are. It's that which is looking at this screen now, or it's the unperceived perceiver. Actually, Bishop Berkeley, the 18th century Anglican bishop, and philosopher, insightfully says that the being of the soul consists in perceiving. I mean, he's an idealist philosopher, so he thinks the being of physical objects consists in their being perceived. Essayist percipi. But never mind. I mean, we don't understand. We don't have to understand Berkeley as saying that the soul has to be perceiving all the time in order to exist, or something like that. But being a perceiver is essentially being a soul, and being a soul is essentially being capable of perceiving. So on this view, you see, you've never really come across yourself. You're the hidden. You're so subjective that you're never objective enough to be perceived in front of you, and that's why there are these phenomenological symptoms of being someone in Sartre and in Merleau-Ponty. In my opinion, it's kind of explanatory. I mean, Simon Blackburn, thinks that, and Tom Nagel. I mean, Simon Blackburn in the UK and Tom Nagel in New York. They think that the soul doesn't solve the problem. Simon thinks that, you could have a CD and change it in a machine, you not particularly notice any difference. Well, you could change souls, and I could not notice any difference. Well, I don't think that's right. The buck has to stop somewhere, or explanations have to come to an end somewhere, as Wittgenstein says. Not quite as early as he thinks, of course. Okay, but on this view, the soul is what your existence consists of. I'm using the word soul to refer to whatever it is that's not your mind and not your body. And Tom Nagel in New York thinks that the same problem would arise all over again for the soul. Because Faris has got a soul, I've got a soul, the viewers have got soul. So what is it about a soul that makes it you? Well, Tom Nagel's absolutely right about that. The same question does arise. But Tom very insightfully sees that there must be something that it consists in to be you, right? So I'm calling that the soul, or I'm giving that the label soul.
Yes, okay. So it's operating in that way. So so what would you say to the sort of the Cartesian who says that the person is just kind of strictly speaking identical to the soul? Could that or the mind, if he takes the mind and the soul as nearly synonymous?
Yeah. Well, this is a very, very interesting question. I mean, in reply to whether the person is identical with the soul, I agree with that. And if the Cartesian thinks that, I think that's absolutely right, because there are possible worlds, an infinite number of possible worlds in which you exist, but this body does not exist, and this mind does not exist, and this human being does not exist, but you do exist. Now, that shows that either you're not identical with your body or your mind, or you're not. At least you're not necessarily identical. We could raise the question of whether there are contingent identities. Kripke has given important considerations, a good argument for saying there are no contingent identities, but supposing he's wrong on this particular point, and there are contingent identities, then you're at best contingently identical with the human being. There'd have to be such a thing as being something for a while, being something for a while. Now, with the other question that you or the Cartesian raises, is the mind the soul? It depends, obviously, what a mind is. I mean, I think the soul is that which thinks, and if by mind you mean that which has a capacity to think, then the soul comes out as a mind, because the soul does have a capacity to think. All right, that's okay. But if by mind you mean this rather Humean or phenomenological constellation of thoughts, then that's not the soul at all. Right. That's not the soul. The soul is the thinker, but not the thoughts, I suppose, would be the right way to look at it. And the reason, again, is that the soul can become separate from the thoughts. I mean, in various kinds of yoga and meditation, it's possible to calm the thoughts completely, so that there aren't any thoughts, but there's only pure consciousness or pure awareness, which is a kind of inner space. And that inner space is the interiority of the soul. On my view, which is a phenomenological view, I suppose, the soul is an absolute interiority. What I mean by an absolute interiority is an inside without an outside, an inside without an outside. And really, your soul is a kind of space, a kind of unchanging space within which you live your life, in which thoughts and experiences, colors, shapes, sounds, all come and go. If you're sufficiently attentive, or perhaps sufficiently deconditioned, it's possible to notice that you are your own soul. That you see, as well as something being you, there's something about you that has remained utterly unchanging over the years. That there's something that solves the problem of personal identity. There's something that accounts for the earlier person, in a sense, being identical with the later person, being the same person as the later person, despite all these changes, getting grey hair, getting fatter, getting older, all these things. You know, there are many changes, but despite the many changes, there's a sense in which it's still you. There's a sense in which it's still you. Now, in order for an explanation to be adequate, whatever it is that's you has to be utterly unchanging. Otherwise, it's just part of the problem. It's not part of the solution. There's something that is timelessly you, and that again, I'm going to use the word soul to refer to that. You see,
Yeah. Yeah.
the more you do this phenomenology, and the more you pay attention to what's required to answer the question, right? What are the parameters that have to be met in order to answer the question? The more you see that we are actually talking about what religious people call the soul, what Saint Augustine or in a way Descartes would call the soul.
Yeah.
And
So
I mean, it has to be a soul in the sense of Plato rather than Aristotle, or Augustine rather than Aquinas, to have the explanatory power to
right.
answer the question. Being someone, a
What
sort
what
of Aristotelian supervenient view wouldn't work, wouldn't be good enough.
it wouldn't be yeah, yeah, right. Help me understand, help us understand why would Aristotle not be good enough? I'm on the same page, I think, and I agree. Yeah.
Well, it depends a bit how you read Aristotle. There's a passage in Aristotle where he suggests that the intellect is immortal, right? Survives death. But John Cottingham, who's now one of my colleagues in Oxford, says that this is a later addition, something that was put into the De Anima by later commentators. And it's true that that's rather an unusual passage, which doesn't fit very well with the rest of De Anima. And by and large, Aristotle is a functionalist about the mind, I think. By and large, he thinks that the mental states are products of the physical states, or as we put it today, that the mind is supervenient on the body. Now, it might well be that there are mental states which are empirically dependent on the brain, but talking in this kind of way doesn't approach the very personal and existential question of why something is you. It doesn't come near. I mean, not just in neuroscience, but in philosophy, we use a fairly third person or anonymous language. We talk about the mind, the brain, mental states, persons, and so on. Well, this anonymous generality doesn't do justice to the fact that you are viewing the world from this human being, that you are this presence, that you are this very one. You are this subjective consciousness, or something that's so subjective it's not objective or can't be beholden from the outside.
Yes. So, yeah, I've struggled, and I think this is the way you're framing it. I think this helps with some of the contemporary discussions on, say, following Aristotle, the contemporary discussions of hylomorphism that seek to describe personhood along the lines of a kind, nature, animal, of some sort of form, matter, compound, or a configured configurer. And my question when I read these in sometimes very sophisticated treatments of how it is that they understand the constitutive aspects of the material body that is more than a reductive machine, is my question always seems to come back to, well, you're having to describe the person through these third person ways. Doesn't seem to get at the question at all. And but they're persistent. They're persistent that this is the right way to understand personhood, but they're always having to deal with personhood through some kind of third person manner of how it is that the complex biological form is constitutive of what you are, and that must have something to do with the what goes into making you you, because well, you're our everything that we do, at least from their vantage point, our operations, our cognitive operations, are already biologically enmeshed and give some sort of explanation to our cognition. But the way that they're framing the issues doesn't seem to ever get at the question of personhood. So that's quite a hand wavy. I know that sounds a little hand wavy of all the hylomorphic literature. There's a lot of complicated literature out there, but the majority, unless and until they're willing to grant something like, this is something that I've pressed, and I think the way you're framing it is makes it a bit clear. Unless the Thomist or the hylomorphist is willing to say something about the thing having the thoughts and the experiences and the biological operations, well, it's not the informational reality of that biological thing, or the thoughts themselves, or the experiences themselves. It is actually they have to say something about this subjective, substantive reality that is always it is never adequately described by the biological operations or the cognitive or the experiences themselves. Those never even come close to touching what it is that is the person.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I'm inclined to say you can either see that or you can't. I suppose that would be rude to say it's a question of intelligence, but I think you can either see what you just said or you can't. You can't see it. But I think these functionalist and materialist and physicalist explanations gain whatever plausibility they do have by taking a purely third-person perspective on the person. What I mean by that is that if they seem to work, they only work for somebody else. They only work for somebody who's not you, or they only work for someone viewed from the standpoint of someone who's not that person, right? Or they only work from the standpoint of exteriority, if they work at all. And now lots of philosophical problems are like that, including lots of philosophical problems raised by the existentialists. For example, the problem of free will and determinism is, if I have free will, I freely choose to do the things that I do, and that means I could refrain from doing them and perhaps do other things instead. And this is my free choice. I'm not compelled or caused in an inevitable way to do the things that I do. I'm not a machine, if even machines are inevitable in their behavior. But I can choose to do X, or I can choose to do Y, or I can not do X, and I can do Z instead, and so on. If we've got free will. Now, determinism is in a way, the opposite view. Determinism is the view that if an event is caused, it's inevitable. In other words, if its cause happens, it can't not happen, or causes necessitate their effects, or causes effects inevitable if the causes happen. Now, and that seems to rule out free will if we just accept the premise that there are causes of human behavior, neurological or Freudian or external pressures of the environment or other human beings. Now, excuse me. Now, going back to the first person, third person distinction, I can just about at a pinch believe that you are a deterministic system, that the things that you do are a sort of a fleshy consequence of your upbringing or your neuroscience and so on. But it's in my own first person singular case that I know really very well that I've got freedom of choice, you know? And sometimes, as Sartre says, the choices can be terribly, terribly difficult. There can be moral dilemmas, what to do about a close relative who's terminally ill. Should you, allow the hospital to switch off their machine or not? Or supposing there's some political or military cause, should you, or some oppression that's being faced, should you join the military or not? Should you join a trade union or not? Now, sometimes these can be very difficult choices, and if we've got free will, these choices are real. And it seems to me it's in our own first-person case that we feel the reality of choice. I mean, Sartre, for example, thinks that determinism is rather an abstract theory, not a very concrete or practical theory. But the lived human reality is freedom. Sartre doesn't like the expression free will. He prefers freedom, liberté. He doesn't use volonté libre or anything like that. He talks about liberté, perhaps because he thinks free will is a tautological turn of phrase.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let's stick with Sartre, and I want to come back to the what is the in terms of and maybe say something just briefly about how it's developed this way, the relationship between existentialism and phenomenology, what those are, and connected with Jean-Paul Sartre. In his what I know from Jean-Paul Sartre, and so I want to unpack this a little bit more, because I think when a lot of people, and maybe many listeners, have read Jean-Paul Sartre and they see his being and nothingness, they may be shocked to see this as leading somehow to metaphysics, or this is a helpful way of arriving at metaphysics. They might find that a little shocking to the system. Because in his book, I remember in undergrad, I was reading Being and Nothingness, and it was not an easy read. It was not. He makes certain statements that sound contradictory at one level. So, and I know there's probably obvious explanations for this, but because he's speaking within the context of existence, but he says things that sound contradictory, like when he says like things like nothingness lies coiled in the heart of being like a worm, or nothingness haunts being. Man is a being himself who makes himself a lack of being. Consciousness is a being, the nature of which is to be conscious of the nothingness of its being. Help us make sense of that. And how does nothingness, when I think of nothingness, if I'm being literal, right? Maybe he's not being literal. Maybe he's being literal. I don't know. If I'm being literal and I think of nothingness, well, there's nothing. So,
no, I think he's being literal. I think he's being as literal as the language allows. I mean, maybe there isn't purely literal language, perhaps, but insofar as it is literal. I mean, I think that in order to make sense of these seemingly paradoxical utterances, we have to get a grip on what he means by nothingness. Now, one way of understanding nothingness is that your own existence is given to you as a kind of space, or as a kind of absence, or as a kind of zone, a bit like the visual field. The visual field you could, in a way, understand as part of this. But if you think of the visual field as also being the auditory field, and where your thoughts happen, and these all being the same space, then your consciousness, or the zone of your own experience, is a kind of nothingness in the heart of being. I mean, to put it slightly crudely, it's as though you are a donut, with a hole in the middle. But you are the hole, and the world is the flesh of the donut, or was it dough? You would say the dough of the donut. The world or being, in being in the sense of the world is the brown, or is my cream on it, whatever it is, the donut, and you are the hole in the middle. So there is nothingness at the heart of being, and you are that nothingness. Now, I think that unwittingly Sartre has discovered the interiority of his own soul. I think this nothingness is not absolutely nothing, but it's something spiritual, and it's characteristic of something spiritual that there's something it consists in to be it, right? You are it, and that's part of what its spirituality consists in. And your being it prevents it appearing in the manner of an object or an external thing. I mean, this view I have that spirituality is essentially tied to being someone or being something in this subjective sense. You remember in Exodus, God says, "I am," or "I am that I am," and the "I am" is an expression of pure spirituality. Well, we're made in the image of God, and so in a finite way or in a more restrictive way, I am is true of each of us. Now, this nothingness at the heart of being that Sartre has discovered, although he's an atheist and anti-religious and so on, doesn't like Christianity, can be understood as one of the many respects in which we're made in the image of God. You are an I am. Or God has lent to us, if you like, the I am, or the property of being something, or being someone. So this is a very important way in which nothingness arises within Sartre's existential phenomenology. I mean, there are other ways in which nothing appears in being a nothingness. For example, he's in a cafe and he's waiting for his friend Pierre, and Pierre doesn't show up. But there's a clattering of cups and saucers. There are French waiters moving about brusquely. There are people shouting in French, and all this is going on in Paris, you see. And but Pierre, he is not there. He is not there, right? So the absence of Pierre is a presence, or the presence of Pierre is an absence, perhaps. This is a kind of nothingness, and there's a presentation of nothing where there should be the presence of Pierre. Now, you might think, what on earth? Isn't he making a bit of a fuss about this? But actually, it's extremely perceptive, because Sartre says, actually, there's an infinite number of people absent from the cafe. For example, the Duke of Wellington, the old British general who defeated the French, is the Duke of Wellington is absent from the cafe, along with an infinite number of other people. But their absence is not a presence, or their presence is not an absence, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yes, they're present on absence. Yes.
Yeah. But Pierre, okay, the absence of Pierre is the presence. Now that's a kind of nothingness, or a kind of non-being. Now, in one of the paradoxical remarks that you reported from Sartre, he talks about nothingness as a being, or consciousness as a being. Now, of course, he doesn't. But by a being here, he doesn't mean a physical object or anything like that. He doesn't mean some physical item that can be discriminated in the world or in the environment. But it's nonetheless the case that your consciousness is not my consciousness, and your I am is not my I am.
Yes, right.
I mean, there are people who deny this.
Right.
I mean, you can read some Vedantic philosophy, some ancient Hindu and proto-Hindu philosophy, as saying that we're all the same person, that we're all the same consciousness. And it's possible also to read Hegel, the early 19th century German idealist philosopher, as saying that there's only one consciousness. Now, on one view of Vedanta or one interpretation of Vedanta and on one interpretation of Hegel, that which looks through your eyes is that which looks through my eyes, and that which looks through the viewer's eyes, the listener's eyes. So there's only one consciousness. Hegel says somewhere, consciousness knows that it is one, or knows that it's only one. I think this doesn't really solve the problem to my mind. I don't think it's quite right. I mean, our colleague Benedict Gurker in Bochum University in Germany holds a view like, or he used to hold a view a bit like this, and he insisted it was logically consistent with his Catholicism, which I couldn't really see. But
yes, yes.
but Benny is very good at arguing, so I don't know.
He is. He is. He's fascinating.
Okay,
Yes.
but the thing is, now the reason I think it doesn't solve the problem is that the uniqueness of you being you is not captured. Now you might say, it is because there's only one consciousness, and the oneness of the one consciousness is this oneness of your existence. But that's not good enough, because there's the oneness of Joshua Farris's existence, and there's the oneness of Stephen Priest's existence. And my being this interiority is not you being that interiority. Or put it this way, if there were two Buddhist monks and they were both sitting cross-legged meditating in the meditation hall, and they reach a state of meditation or peace and tranquility where thought has ceased, their bodies disappear. Still, this monk's consciousness is not that monk's consciousness, or this subjective point of view is not that subjective point of view. Even if in some ways we're dependent upon cosmic consciousness or God or being,
Right.
the uniqueness, the one-offness, the individuality of you being you is not captured by this global view. I also think that on that interpretation of Vedanta and on the Benedict Gurker view, in effect, you are God. In effect, you are God.
Right.
And if you were God, you would have the properties of God. You'd be omniscient and omnipotent. You'd be morally perfect, and all sorts of things that we manifestly are not. So I think the view is not right in that respect either. I also think that if there was only one subject of consciousness, or only one consciousness, or maybe only one thing that was aware, this one consciousness would see the world through all of us simultaneously. And if I'm it, then I see the world through. If I am it, I see the world through Joshua Farris as well as millions of other people. And if you are it, you see the world through Stephen Priest as well as Joshua Farris and through millions of other people. But our experience is manifestly not like that. It's finite and confined and centered on just this being who you are.
From this perspective,
So I don't agree with. So I don't think. I don't say it's definitely absolute. In philosophy, it's hard to rule things out, but it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the problem to adopt this whatever it is. I don't know what they call it, panpsychism or pan-meism or something.
Yes, that's an interesting word. I
Sure
don't think I've seen that, but maybe that's it.
But we could call it.
Maybe we could. That. Yeah, we could publish a paper on pan-meism, I'm sure. Anytime you have pan, it's a big deal. People love it. I used to call it it's clickbait for academics, panpsychism or pan-meism. Pan-meism, that's interesting. I like that. No, okay. So that was a little fun sidebar, but let me come back to this. I have about 10 questions that are related to this, because I'm beginning to see a strand of thought that I'm trying to get to, that I want to try to understand better, and help our listeners understand better as well, hopefully. Let me come at this a couple ways. Okay, one question, and then I'll try to get to the others and try to link them up somehow. One is as the image bearers of God, there is, you connect it to the I am statement, and we are like God in that way, that there is a sense of I am. And oh, let's come back to Sartre real quick. Sartre, I think, is I see the train of thought when he's describing nothingness. There's different definitions of nothingness that we might be working with, and kind of the purest sense of nothingness, if you can describe it as pure. We can't really, but if we could have a metaphysical nothingness in the medieval sense, that there is nothing literally, then that would we it would be unspeakable. We might as well not speak, right? It's just there's nothing, no thing. But in Sartre's sense, coming from his existentialist perspective, is the definition, if we can give a definition to it, a definition of pure consciousness as being, in the sense that there is no thing there, and that's what he means by nothing.
That's very interesting that you say that. I've sometimes thought that nothingness in these phenomenological discussions should be replaced by no thingness.
Yeah.
Hyphenated expression, no hyphen thing hyphen ness, no thingness.
Yeah.
You mention pure nothing, by which presumably you mean absolutely nothing whatsoever, right? On my view, there can't be any such thing as that. Roughly, for an argument that might be found in Parmenides, the pre-Socratic philosopher who wrote a very early work of philosophy in the form of a poem. I mean, I think that it's contradictory to say there is nothing. It's not contradictory to say there are no things, there are no physical objects, or no particular items. That's all right. These beings or things that there are might not have existed. In Christian terms, God creates optionally. He might not have created, and things exist contingently. All right, but nothing. There can't be such a thing as nothing, or there is nothing, is contradictory, because it means there exists nothing. In one of his perceptive works, Heidegger says, das Nichts selbst nichtet, nothingness itself annihilates, or in Michael Inwood's translation, the nothing noths, or nothing nullifies itself, or nothing makes itself nothing, or nothing negates itself, selbst. Now, Heidegger wants to avoid saying that nothingness exists, or nothing exists, or nothing in the sense of absolutely nothing at all exists, because that would be contradictory, or that would be incoherent. That would be to ascribe existence to non-existence. And it's in the nature of nothing not to exist. And Heidegger's absolutely right about this. Heidegger sees this, and Parmenides sees this. Now, if you see this, if you see that it's impossible for nothing to exist, it's impossible for there to be nothing, that only leaves the possibility that there's being rather than nothing. Or if nothing necessarily does not exist, and necessarily there's either being or nothing, then being necessarily exists. Being necessarily exists. This is a logical consequence of nothing necessarily does not exist, right? Being necessarily exists.
Yes.
Now, this is quite interesting theologically, because we see here one of the essential properties of God. God necessarily exists. God cannot not exist. It's not possible for God not to exist. Or this property of God is shared with being rather than nothingness, or pure being. Now, I think for this sort of reason that pure being rather than nothing, and rather than beings, and rather than becoming, is the being of God. I think pure being is the being of God. In a way, Aquinas is saying this in De Ente et Essentia. At least he is the way I read him. Now, on this view, then, God is not a being in any straightforward sense. In a more profound sense, God might be a being because, as Parmenides sees, being as being is one, is essentially and necessarily one, rather than a plurality. Even if there's a plurality of things that exist, right? Being rather than not being is a monolithic fact or a monolithic singular fact.
Yeah.
So on the view that I'm talking about now, there's a very clean and strong distinction between being and beings. Being necessarily is, not just essentially because it's being, but being cannot not be. So being exists necessarily, but beings exist contingently. There might not have been any beings. There might not have been any physical objects. I mean, we can ask questions like, well, could there have been no numbers? Pythagoras and Crispin Wright think that numbers necessarily exist. We could discuss this. It seems to me that the number one necessarily exists because being is essentially necessarily one, and so it looks as though there couldn't have not been the number one. But aside from that, I'm less confident about the necessary existence of numbers. It might be that numbers are generated by beings, but so there's being and there are beings. Now, being necessarily exists, but beings contingently exist. There might not have been any beings. So we could ask the question: why are there any beings? Why are there any beings? Why isn't there just pure being?
Yeah.
Well, the only possibility is that being beings. That's the only possibility. Being beings, or being somehow generates the being. Right? Now, again, one of the component parts of Christianity is put in place, right? Being beings, or in Christian terms, God creates. If you take my view that the being of God is pure being, or being itself, or being as opposed to nothing, and you've got beings which we're surrounded by, and in some way you are occupying one, or you're present at one, why are there any of these beings? Well, it must be that being beings. But if being is the being of God, as I'm suggesting, then that's equivalent to saying that God creates. And you're forced to this view really by drawing this distinction between the necessity of being and the contingency of beings. Being cannot not be, but all the beings that there are, they might not have been. They are, but they might not have been.
They might not have been.
So again, you see, a philosophical question has a theological answer. That the Seinsfrage, the question of being, raised by Heidegger in the 1927 book Sein und Zeit, Being and Time, it has a theological answer. What is being? Well, being is the being of God. Being is the being of God. Interestingly, if you read Parmenides, who's a pre-Christian thinker, he's writing at least 400 years before the life of Christ. Parmenides is saying, being is not physical, and it can be thought, but it can't be perceived, and we only have limited knowledge of being, and being seems to be infinite or unbounded in every direction. So in a pre-Christian way, Parmenides is beginning to ascribe divine predicates to pure being. I mean, because I've come to theism from a secular background. I didn't have any sort of religious agenda before thinking in these ways. It's because of the philosophical questions needing theological or remaining unanswerable without the truth of theism that I'm advancing these views now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Let me
yeah.
let
Sorry.
me
Yeah.
ask you this question. Yeah, that's good. So with somebody like Sartre, who it seems that when he is approaching nothingness, maybe it should be understood um, as no dash thingness, no
Mm.
thingness.
Yeah.
Maybe I wonder what he would say if he would agree with that, or if
Mm.
he would.
Mm.
How is it that he and contemporaries could arrive at a no thingness answer or a nothingness answer, a non-theological answer, if they let's say we take them on this journey to understand uh, consciousness and consciousness as being self, as the kind of space in which
Yeah.
there is subjectivity that
Yeah.
can't be described by no thingness, but it's still there. I
Yeah.
mean, it's almost like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's almost like this is this there's something that's I think this is really important to get after. But it's like it's almost it's so true, but it's in some ways hard to grasp. It's like when this is probably why I think Twilight Zone is the best show ever made. Are you familiar with Twilight Zone?
I'm not sure we have that. We might have it in the UK. If so, I don't know it. I don't think.
It was a '60s show. Rod Serling. Oh, you must be familiar. You must watch Twilight Zone. I think you would love it. I would love to see what your how you experience it. Um,
I mean, I was around in the '60s, but I don't remember Twilight Zone. There's a joke there about the '60s that people make, but there we are.
you are yes, I get it. Yeah. Okay, I'll come back another time to Twilight Zone. It's
Yeah.
Twilight Zone. There's always this first line. It's the Rod Serling's he's a famous gentleman. Maybe it was more famous in America. I thought it was
Yeah.
I thought it was in Britain as well. But
Well, it
it's
might have been. I probably didn't just see a lot of TV.
no, that's
Mm.
okay. I he talks about this thin line between the uh, uh, the thin line between consciousness and no consciousness, or the thin
Yeah.
line between I can't remember the line off the
Mm.
top of my head, but
Mm.
anyway, I'll come back to something else. So let me come back maybe to a more concrete question, because there's this thread that I still want to get after. You made the oh, I want to ask about any thoughts on how somebody could arrive at consciousness and say there's being, but still be reticent to speak in terms of anything further about that, or maybe recognize consciousness but stop in
Yeah.
terms of
Okay. Well, I think actually that if somebody arrives at their own consciousness, if they're in a state of prayer or meditation or deconditioning or some sort of state where they're aware of pure consciousness, um, to me, there's an oddness in thinking that they found something similar to objects found in the ordinary course of the world. It seems to me that the pure consciousness that you are, or this subjective interiority or space that I'm calling your own soul, is of a different order ontologically in terms of what exists from things that come and go. I'm not saying it's necessarily indestructible, but it's not the same as a thought or a physical object. a thought that might arise or subside, or a perception that might come and go. It's rather the whole zone or arena where that happens, and it's not the same as any physical object. It's nothing like a brick or an iron bar or a milk bottle or a book or or something like that. And at least since Einstein and possibly Whitehead and others, physical objects are perhaps best regarded as processes. They have a beginning, they have a duration, they change perceptibly and imperceptibly, and they have a demise. Well, consciousness isn't given to itself, or is not disclosed as any kind of process. So consciousness is not presented as the sort of item that could be generated and decay and end in the manner of some earthly thing. It's as though we are, if not out of this world, we are from out of this world. It's as though the world is pinched in a bit at the side, and that's your existence. And here you are viewing the world in front of you, or operating in it from this as a presence in this fleshy thing. Yeah, I mean, there are people who discover pure consciousness and don't see that they discovered the interiority of their own soul. Husserl and Sartre, amongst them. I've written a book about Husserl and Sartre. I'm showing it to you because I'd like you to read it.
Oh, the subject in question. That's an excellent.
Not because there's any money in it. There might be a microscopic amount of money in it for me if you buy this, but there's even less money in this than in the other two.
Maybe you could buy a McDonald's burger with it. Yeah, that's what we used to joke about in at the university. We would joke with one another. If you buy more, eventually we might be able to buy ourselves a Mickey meal.
No, that's right. I mean, academic philosophy.
Yes.
I'm not sure you couldn't live off writing academic philosophy. Right. So, but you see, Husserl and Sartre have got something in common. They're both phenomenologists. We haven't really said what phenomenology is, but phenomenology is the description of appearances. It's the description of what appears directly to consciousness as it appears. And the aim of phenomenology is to ground, is the rather Kantian aim of grounding knowledge in the contents of experience. And Husserl hopes to expose structures of consciousness that will explain how it's possible for us to perceive things and think things. Now, Sartre and Merleau-Ponty are very influenced by Husserl. It looks as though, well, Sartre went along to Husserl's lectures in Paris between the two world wars, and in the hands of Sartre and Merleau-Ponty, phenomenology becomes existential phenomenology, a fusion of existentialism and phenomenology. But the trouble is that although we can learn an awful lot from phenomenology, and it's extremely insightful, it's all operating within a neo-Kantian anti-metaphysical paradigm, and so doesn't have the resources really to solve fundamental philosophical problems. I mean, in Ideas, the 1913 book, and various sequels, Husserl describes pure consciousness, but he doesn't realize, or because he's doing phenomenology, he won't do metaphysics because it's only the description of appearances. Phenomenology is only a description of appearances. So he won't do metaphysics because that deals with realities. And so he's not going to entertain the supposition that pure consciousness is the interiority of your own soul. And similarly, Sartre in Being and Nothingness, there's a passage in Being and Nothingness where he sees the problem of being someone. He puts it in a rather Kripke-esque way in terms of origins or genesis. He says we can ask the question why some birth was my birth, or why some coming into being of a human being, of the fetus, becoming a born human being. Why that gives rise to me? But Sartre quickly shies away from that question because he more or less says we're doing phenomenology, we're not doing metaphysics, so we're not going to try and answer that question. Now, the trouble is, you see, that since Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, or it was published it's in two editions, A and B, towards the end of the 18th century. Since Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, Western philosophy has been operating within a Kantian paradigm. Nearly
Yes.
all the movements in philosophy are neo-Kantian or are operating within the fundamental parameters of the Critique of Pure Reason. And it's a deeply anti-metaphysical book. It's not clear that as a matter of biography, Kant was an anti-metaphysical human being, but he perhaps authored a more anti-metaphysical book in its consequences than he thought he was going to author. Again, maybe Derrida's right. We can understand people better than they understand themselves in at least some respects. And the Critique of Pure Reason, although in a way a wonderful and very interesting book, has been a catastrophe for metaphysics and theology, in my opinion. Yeah, it's like Hume. One of my colleagues, Millikan in Oxford, thinks that pretty much everything in Kant is in the essence of Kant is in Hume, anticipated by Hume. And of course, Kant famously said that Hume awoke him from his dogmatic slumbers. Yeah, so it's for this it's because of this Kantian pessimism about answering profound questions of philosophy that Husserl misses the interiority of the soul. Sartre does not pursue the question of being someone, and Heidegger doesn't finish Being and Time and address the Seinsfrage. But all these issues need to be addressed theologically, or the resources for resolving them involve God, the immortality of the soul, and the freedom of the will. I think in the person of Christ, Christianity has its own existentialist philosopher.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. We'll have to unpack that. I did. I wanted to read this and we'll come back to. I have so many questions. There's still a thread I want to get after, and I think you opened up a lot with Christianity. It has its kind of own sort of intrinsic philosophical perspective, maybe through a Christian existentialism. Maybe.
Yeah. There is a bit of a literature on Christian existentialism, isn't there? John Macquarie.
Yes.
He wrote a very good book on existentialism, and he wrote a book called An Existentialist Theology, which is about Heidegger and Buber, Martin Buber.
Yes.
Theology. There are Christian existentialists. Gabriel Marcel is a Christian existentialist in France.
Yeah.
Kierkegaard, of course, is
Kierkegaard, of course,
Lutheran existentialist.
Yes. So I found I wanted to read this to you just as a little breather here, but it's also fun and it might stimulate some thoughts because I love these lines and I love the show. I found the Twilight Zone introduction. There were a few different ones throughout the years. This is it. I just want to read it to you briefly and see what you think of it. You're traveling through another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind, a journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's a signpost up ahead. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone. There's a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
Very interesting. I think it's very insightful.
Yeah.
I mean, to be slightly trivial, it kind of fits that it was there in the 60s. Um, um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it would take us too far from existentialism, I think, to talk about interpretations of quantum physics. But you probably
Yes.
know that on the so-called many worlds or Everett interpretations of quantum physics, there's an infinite number of universes, and they're not just possible worlds in a sort of logical sense. They all exist.
Right.
The
Yes.
infinite number of possibilities,
We
and
need to have another show on that.
yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be interesting.
If you
That'd be
could.
my pleasure. I'd talk
Yes.
about that.
That would be
They're
wonderful.
very interesting, the interpretations of quantum physics. I think that any of the ones that is viable presupposes the reality of consciousness and ultimately the existence of God, because the consciousness has to be global to sustain the quantum reality. But there's although terribly important and underrated over the last 100 years or so. Oh, it's not this. We're not really talking about existentialism. Let's go back to existentialism. Can I just say a
Yes.
couple of
Let's
things?
go back
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
looking at this first person, third person distinction,
Yeah.
a surprising number of philosophical questions. The answers are split along this first person singular, third person plural division. For example, the materialism and functionalism that we're talking about, somebody else could just about believe that this is only a fleshy, complicated physical object with no interiority, no subjective point of view. But it's in your own case that you know directly that you're a conscious being, that you have perceptions, hopes, fears, thoughts, emotions, these things. So that divides along the first person, third person way. Similarly, there's a kind of oneness or uniqueness or one-offness to your own existence, but in the case of other people, there are many of them. So there's a kind of one-many asymmetry between your own being and the being of other people, or people as observed by you. We've already mentioned free will and determinism. It's free will is encountered in your own first-person case, but you can just about believe that other people are causally determined. And subjectivity and objectivity. How do you know there's any subjectivity? Well, it's through your own case. It's through being this being that you know that there's subjectivity, being something and being a subjective experience. Excuse me.
Yes.
And how do you
Yes.
know that? Well, it's through observing the what is not you, as though the universe divides into two mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive portions. The portion that is you and the remainder that is not you. The portion that is you is called subjective. The remainder that's not you is called objective. In the direct sense of objective, object-like over there. There's a different kind of objectivity, which is more the idea of a bird's eye view on everything. But we're not talking about that here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to step back just for a moment and think about this. There's a thread here. So let's see. Yeah, I like I like the idea, the analogy of the donut with the donut hole inside.
The Sartre,
Um,
yeah.
for Sartre,
Yeah.
yes. And so for Sartre, he has all this stuff, the things of existence around him, but
Mm.
he fails to derive a sort of metaphysical I
Mm.
from
Yeah.
the
Right.
experiences of it. So
That's right.
is he caught? Where is he caught? Is he caught in some sort of Humean,
Yeah, I think so.
Kantian
I
sort
think
of
so.
bundle?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the book that I wrote about Sartre and Husserl, the subject in question, when I was writing that, I thought Sartre is like Hume and Husserl is a bit like Descartes because Husserl does have the transcendental ego as the subject of experiences. He's only sure that, or he only ascribes existence to the transcendental ego insofar as he has experiences or thoughts or or perceptions, but nonetheless, it is the subjective pole or the haver of experience. Now Sartre, in his book, The Transcendence of the Ego, La Transcendance de l'Ego, he thinks that it's phenomenologically illegitimate to postulate the transcendental ego, that it would have to incoherently appear as an object in order for it to be postulated by phenomenology. And of course, Husserl and Sartre are trying to do phenomenology. But nonetheless, yeah. But nonetheless, you see, Descartes thinks that there are no thoughts without a thinker, and Hume thinks that there are only thoughts, or when he looks for himself in introspection, he only happens upon some idea or other.
Yes.
And not any owner of those ideas, and not any single impression that could be him, no single idea that could be him, right? I think it's right as you say, but I mean, you could say that Husserl and Sartre are doing phenomenology, and you might think Descartes and Hume are not, but in a way, perhaps Descartes and Hume are doing phenomenology, or a kind of proto-phenomenology. That Hume is an empiricist, and I think that Descartes is meditating. I think in the meditations he is meditating. I'll now turn my mind away from the objects of the senses and so on. The thoughts are exposed. Oh yes, the I am, all that. It's a meditation that he's engaged in. Something that's missed in the literature on Descartes, but it is actually meditation. They just assume that meditations are thoughts, and in a way they're the opposite.
Yeah,
In a way,
it's the absence of those. Yeah, and that's what Descartes is helping us to see.
Yeah. Could I mention is it allowed to mention a couple of books by colleagues of mine? Ralph Weir has written. Ralph Weir from the University of Lincoln in England. He also spends quite a lot of time in New York. Ralph Weir has written a book called Metaphysics and the Mind-Body Problem, or it might be the Mind-Body Problem and Metaphysics. But Ralph has arguments for the conclusion that if there are thoughts and experiences, then there must be an owner of those thoughts and experiences. Or if there are mental states, there must be a mental substance or something that has these thoughts. And I highly recommend that book to the audience here if they're interested in profound metaphysical questions about their own existence, or what the mind is, or what consciousness is. And the other book that's important is by Nicholas Waghorn, Waghorn is a colleague of mine in Oxford, and he's written a book called Nothingness and the Meaning of Life. Nothingness and the Meaning of Life, published by Bloomsbury in London. And Waghorn is a very careful and patient and pleasant thinker about all these issues to do with nothingness that we've been discussing today. Well, in a way, whether you could be nothing at all, or whether you're a pure consciousness, whether you're a soul, and how the view you take of this impacts the meaning of your existence, what it means to be you, and what's the point in existing, that sort of thing.
Yes,
so
no, that's
Ralph
good.
Weir and Nicholas Waghorn, I recommend their works.
No, that's very good. Weir's work is excellent. Waghorn is excellent. I was unfamiliar with the Waghorn's book, the Bloomsbury book. I will have to pick that up as well. Yeah, his work on the meaning of life is really excellent and nuanced. So I don't know how much more time. If you have a few more minutes, I wanted to try to at least wrap up some ideas.
Sure.
And I feel like we didn't have enough time to get through all the existentialism. I really wanted to get to questions about despair. Despair, but maybe we could come back next month if you have any time. We could do that. But I wanted to throw out this. So there's a couple ideas I'm thinking of here, and I wanted to get at the timelessness question. They're both related, but they're at first they sound unrelated. The timeless question is certainly relevant today as it
Mm.
pertains to us, and then stepping back even further in some works that are not necessarily interested in the self question, but you've tied
Mm.
the self to that question via
Mm.
the I am and the
Mm.
nature of consciousness as presence that
Yeah.
is being of some sort. But there's been a lot of interest, of course, in describing God as being a tensed being. And that has been kind of amongst many philosophers of the day, that has been the rage, you might say. It's taken a lot. It's really motivated a lot of reflection that
Oh,
God
well,
is
if you're talking
tensed.
about
You know?
what I think you're talking about, I don't think it's right. I don't think God exists in time. I think that the things that God does appear in time to us, and the effects are within space time, and therefore, in principle, perceptible by us. But I think the acts of God are all timeless, as far as God is concerned, or from God's point of view, or God, qua God, or God in himself is timeless. My colleague in Oxford, Richard Swinburne, he thinks that God exists in time, otherwise he can't, do all
Yes.
the things in the Old Testament and so on. No, no, no. It's temporal for us, timeless for God. It's not really a, 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 a problem. I think God is the now. I think if anything exists, it exists now. If you look at Sartre and Merleau-Ponty, they've got chapters on temporality, or time as lived, or time as experienced by the human being. And at the beginning of his chapter, Sartre says, "Oh, he doesn't mention Aristotle. It's obviously based on the physics. He says, "Oh, the past did exist, but does not exist, so it does not exist. The future will exist, but it does not exist, so the future does not exist." And everybody knows the present is a disappearing nothing between the past and the future. Well, I think the third point is wrong. There's a sense in which it's always now, or the time is always now. I had a conversation with the Dalai Lama about this, and the Dalai Lama agrees with me that there's a sense in which it's unchangingly now, or changelessly now. Now, this uh, contents of the now come and go. Of course, they do. And we have thoughts that we think are about the future, and we have thoughts that we think are about the past. But they're all happening in the now, in the timeless now. So time is happening in the now, or there's coming and going within the now. But this now, this timeless now, or unchanging now, is the presence of God. The reason I say that is that without the now, nothing would happen, or in Christian terms, there's no creation.
Yeah.
The now is not some object or process within the now. The now is the ground of all the things that are now. The now is immaterial. The now is the cause, or the source, or the origin of everything that happens, because happening is happening in the now. Now, the more you build these features in, the more you realize that we're living in the presence of God, or the unchanging now, which is very real. In a way, nobody's come across anything else. That unchanging now is the unchanging presence of God. And in a way, this is a fusion of existentialism and metaphysics, because it really is our existential situation to be in the unchanging presence of God. We've never been anywhere else except to be in the unchanging presence of God. And of course, the what we call creation, or the beings are kind of in the way. They're a bit of a mask, or having all this content. But it would be too shocking for the objects to all disappear. It'd be interesting to see what happens when we die.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
So
but but you but God creates in the now, and all the coming and going is inside creation. It's not outside creation. God creates timelessly, but He creates time timelessly.
yes.
I mean, it's
Uh,
quite hard to understand that, but it's not absolutely intellectually insuperable, I don't think. You know.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah. We could chew on that further. We could take that further. Let me ask a different question. in one way, a little more concrete, and then try to draw out some summary as to try to bring it to a close. I know you have things that you have to do.
Not really. No, I'd rather do this, to be honest. No,
Oh,
this is
good.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is good. I've enjoyed this very much. There's still about 100 different questions I still want to ask, but one question is this line of thought is relates to a series of paradigms on the self and God that are theological in nature, and so let me give you two scenarios, and this might sound like an epistemic, but I think there's a metaphysical side to this question. As I'm, especially the last 30 minutes, as I've been listening carefully, solipsism is always kind of in the background, gnawing. But what would you say, and how might we approach or think about, say, something like this? And we touched on this earlier when we touched on a version of pantheism or panentheism, where I am just God. I am. And the concerns with that, the problems with that, at least in terms of how the panentheistic worldview is interpreting that notion of consciousness as presence. If you look at somebody like Bernardo Kastrup, who's not explicitly theistic, he wouldn't affirm theism, he would say. I mean, he's broadly naturalistic, but not an atheist. He wouldn't call him. And he's not a physicalist, certainly, and he believes in spirits and the like. He looks at consciousness as being a kind of a series of folds, so that in the foldings you experience differently, so you can have different points of view. And so he likens this to the way to make sense of it is analogously, he says, something like altered consciousnesses. So you could have, we have this in psychology, this case of altered consciousnesses, where you have these altered states of mind, or even altered selves or altered personalities. And he says the mind, you might call it a divine mind. He doesn't quite go that way. It might be that ourselves are altered consciousnesses, folds in the divine mind, as it were. As I've been listening, I was thinking about that, but I was simultaneously thinking about, I've been listening to some people who are a part of what you might call the New Age, and their descriptions of what is often thought of as the second heaven or astral projections, where they have experiences, encounters. Some of them describe these encounters as being encounters of like Satan or Lucifer. And then in other cases, they have these encounters of Jesus, or at least Jesus is somehow presenting himself as Jesus. And sometimes they think it's not, and sometimes others think it is, and others are, well, they just don't know. But this made me think, in the context of what you're talking about in term metaphysically of consciousness as a kind of presence. There's this problem of it may be an epistemic, but it points to, I think it raises a metaphysical question or concern about the interior space and how that interior space might relate to other interior spaces as representations. Because you talked about these ideas of representations, how it's possible to experience the other, the body of the other, or certainly a machine of the other, which we know more, we may know more about, almost in a deterministic way, right?
Well, you raise a lot of issues there. I mean, you began by talking about solipsism. Solipsism is the doctrine that only I exist, or possibly only my consciousness exists, and other people are just physical exteriors or so. or something like that. I think that there are a couple of reasons to think that solipsism is false. The first is to do with God. I think supposing somebody um, is in a solipsistic state, which you could understand as, in a way, a kind of stage of spiritual development. They think, "Oh my goodness, there might be only my consciousness. There might be just this consciousness that I am. The physical world has fallen away in meditation or yoga or something." Well, the presence that I'm talking about, or the fact that it's always now, or the presence that is the eternal or unchanging now, is manifestly not of your own making, is not of your own making. And if you meditate further, you'll realize that you're in the presence of presence, or you're in the presence of God, and that it's not the case that you're on your own. Far from it. You've never stepped outside the presence of God. Were you to do so, you'd be vaporized in no time at all. So at a mystical level, that is a refutation of solipsism, actually. But in one stage of deconditioning, or one stage of meditating or yoga or whatever, of course, there can be solipsism, and the terror of solipsism. The terror is only I exist, or of all the people, there's only one that exists, and that's me. Uh, I mean, it's
Yeah,
interesting that
I see. That's helpful. Yeah.
at a
Yes.
commonsensical level, solipsism is something laughable. Oh,
Yes.
priest, he's the only person who exists. So yeah, silly person.
Yeah.
Must be an academic or something. He's
Yeah.
not like
Right.
that,
Yes.
right? It's the source of
Yeah.
hilarity. But
Yeah.
at a more profound level, at a meditative level, or at a mystical level, solipsism is terrifying. It's lonely, right, or agoraphobic, or something like that, right? You've got no company, and we are sociable beings, right? Now, on a more mundane level, if you look at being and nothingness, it seems in being and nothingness, when uh, the person's peering through the keyhole and somebody appears behind them and they're surprised. Sartre's saying at that moment, it's not a psychological option for the person peering through the keyhole to disbelieve in other minds, to think that there's no consciousness apprehending him, right? It,
Yes.
it's it's not realistically thinkable. So the solipsism he's implying might be thinkable over a seminar table in a university, but not for the person who's surprised by when they're looking through the keyhole, surprised by somebody else. I mean, the footsteps in the corridor behind them.
Yeah.
I'd also say that
Yeah.
although materialism and determinism work better as third person theories than they do as first person singular theories, they might not even work very well there. I mean, I'm not sure that it's actually true that I only perceive you as matter in motion, and that I've got no sense of your presence or your consciousness as a kind of presence as well. I mean, if I saw you only as matter in motion, I wouldn't feel emotions towards you, such as fear or contempt or apprehension
Uh-huh.
or whatever the range of human emotions that we feel towards the other. They
Yeah.
wouldn't be deployed if literally we were only presented with matter in motion. So there are all these reasons, really, for thinking that solipsism is is false.
That's
I don't
good.
know
Yeah,
what
that's helpful.
I don't know
Yeah,
what the
right.
relation. I don't know what the relationship between disembodied souls is. A colleague of mine in Colorado used to uh, travel down to Mexico to harass the tourists, and I'd say, "Oh, John, which flight are you taking? By Mesa Airlines, or whatever, and he'd say, "Oh no, I'm leaving my body here. I'm leaving my body here in Colorado. I'll just go down.
Yeah.
I'll jump into their bodies."
Interesting.
Yeah, I used to
Yeah.
go to New York, so I said, "Look, I'm going to have somebody there counting yellow taxis on Fifth Avenue, and you're going to have to be there without your body, and you're going to have to tell me how many yellow cabs go in and out of Fifth Avenue from
So, okay,
Central
so he
Park.
was
I'm going to have
practicing.
someone there with a
Yes.
notebook."
So he was practicing out-of-body experiences.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's an
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
yeah, you're not sure how to make the relate. Well, I mean, on your view, out-of-body experiences are possible, of course, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
But no, this has been very good. Very good. I appreciate it very much. Um I think I really want to have a further conversation. So
Sure. Yeah. No worries.
hopefully we could have enough. Hopefully we could have another one, and we
Of
could
course. Yeah.
continue this conversation. I think I think we've hopefully unpacked a little bit more this notion of consciousness's presence that ultimately has theological answers,
Yeah.
and that has I think it overlaps and impacts the atheistic question,
Yeah.
or the concern of the atheist.
Yeah.
Um, hopefully, I think our listeners could have followed that, because that was I think that was really helpful how you spelled it out there. There are how it is that somebody like Sartre could arrive at a place in his consciousness and stop.
Mm.
Because I've
Mm.
engaged with some today who are
Mm.
metaphysically minded,
Mm.
uh, friends of
Mm.
ours even, who are uh, you know, seem to be very in tune with their own consciousness. They
Mm.
assume a kind of consciousness,
Mm.
certainly commonsensically assume consciousness. They
Mm.
assume that there is even that logically that's presupposing some sort of subject
Mm.
consciousness that's necessary, right? A substance of consciousness, which Ralph Weir does very well in nailing down in his recent book.
Mm.
Nonetheless, they kind of still stop there. It's still a little perplexing, but I think the way you approached it and spelled that out, especially in application to Sartre, as
Mm.
Sartre is kind of this existentialist that's still he's like he's like the existentialist version of Hume. He's caught up in Hume and this
Mm.
maybe a mixture of Hume and this Kantian problem that he can't get out of.
Mm.
But
Mm.
if if you were
I, I,
to,
I think, I
yeah,
think, although Sartre and Merleau-Ponty are very insightful people, I don't think they've got the idea of being as monolithic or the now or
ah,
present,
that's
uh,
helpful. Yes,
monolithic. And for that, you really need at least Heidegger and probably Parmenides, the pre-Christian, pre-Socratic thinker. And you see, my strategy in a way is not to prove the existence of God. I've never really tried to do that, but to realize over the years that what I'm doing, perhaps inadvertently, is ascribing divinity to being. But by being, I don't mean the universe or anything like that. By being, I don't mean the totality of things that there are. That would be a mistake. I mean to pure being, to Parmenidean being, or
yeah,
being qua being, or being in it, being in itself. Being in itself turns out to be being for itself, because God is consciousness. God is pure consciousness, right?
yes,
Maybe the quantum physics avenue is the best way of showing that.
Yeah.
So again, yes, I think it's the anti-metaphysical tendency of modern philosophy, the Kantian constraint, and then optimism about science, although that's less prevalent in Sartre and Merleau-Ponty. The phenomenology they feel can't be done scientifically, even though Husserl hoped it would be a new kind of science. It isn't really. And Sartre and Merleau-Ponty are quite good at showing up the limitations of natural scientific understanding of the human lived reality, the lived reality of being you. But the whole anti-metaphysical drift of modern society, and the rather anti-religious drift of modern society is inimical to solving profound philosophical problems.
That's excellent. Yeah, I think that summarized our whole conversation today very well. That's a good thought to conclude on for now, at least. There are several strands that I want to pick up on. I would love to pick up on if you're available in the future.
No, fine. Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Let's continue this.
I am available. I mean, all my I don't do any teaching in Oxford anymore. All my teachings are all my positions are honorary or research.
Oh, good. Very good.
I'm old.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, excellent. Let's bring it around to a
I don't have any
close.
administration, only bureaucracy or paperwork.
That's excellent. That's beautiful, actually. Yes, that's the worst part of that's another discussion. But anyway,
don't get money anymore either. But there we are.
Yeah. Well, let's conclude it there. That was a great note to end on, and let's pick this up again in the near future. I really like that. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you. Thank you.
No, it's a great pleasure to be invited to talk, especially to talk in the US. I've taught in the US in Colorado, Rhode Island, Dartmouth College, good places in there.
Yes.
US. I like the US very much.
Yes.
I'm very fond of the US.
Excellent.
I've been for a while. Very fun.
Yes. We're going to have to bring you over soon. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, you have to come over to England again. That would be great.
I need to. Yes, I do. I need to. Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. It's a theological world after all. Thank you for your time and investment. And if you could sum up your view in a phrase, how would you sum it up?
Philosophical questions have theological answers.
I love it. Let's
whether we like it or not.
That's
whether
right.
we like it or not.
That's
whether
good.
we want it or not.
I love it. That's the way it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.